Mr. Johnson is the only leader of a main party not to have faced a half-hour primetime BBC One grilling by Mr. Neil. The Conservative leader has denied claims he is avoiding scrutiny. But Mr. Neil addressed the PM directly at the end of his fourth leader interview at this election, with Brexit Party leader Nigel Farage. It is not too late. We have an interview prepared. Oven ready, as Mr. Johnson likes to say, he said, in a monologue. The theme running through our questions is trust, and why it's so many times in his career, in politics and journalism, critics and sometimes even those close to him have deemed him to be untrustworthy. It is, of course, relevant to what he is promising us all now. Mr. Johnson has also declined an invitation to be grilled by ITV's Julie Etchingham, as part of her series of leader interviews. Hold to account, Mr. Neil said that no broadcaster can compel a politician to be interviewed. But he added, leaders' interviews have been a key part of the BBC's primetime election coverage for decades. We do them, on your behalf, to scrutinise and hold to account those who would govern us. That is democracy. We have always proceeded in good faith that the leaders would participate. And in every election they have. All of them. Until this one. Mr. Neil then listed the questions he wanted the Prime Minister to answer. These include whether he can be trusted to deliver on his promises for the NHS, and keeping the health service off the table in any post-Brexit trade talks with the US. Mr. Neil said he would also ask the PM about his claim that he has always been an opponent of austerity, another question of trust. He ended the monologue by saying, the Prime Minister of our nation will, at times, have to stand up to President Trump, President Putin, President Xi of China. So it was surely not expecting too much that he spent half an hour standing up to me. Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn, the SNP's Nicola Sturgeon, Lib Dem leader Joe Swinson and Brexit Party leader Nigel Farage have all faced a grilling by Mr. Neil. ITV interview Mr. Johnson was quizzed by the BBC's Andrew Marr on Sunday, on why he had not yet agreed to be interviewed by Andrew Neil. He denied avoiding primetime scrutiny, saying he had done TV debates, interviews and a 2-hour phone-in. Separately, on Thursday evening, the Labour Party complained about BBC bias, in a letter to Director General Tony Hall. Labour's co-campaign coordinator Andrew Gwynn highlighted Mr. Johnson's failure to be interviewed by Andrew Neil. The letter claimed the Conservatives were being allowed to play the corporation, making the BBC effectively complicit in giving the Conservative Party an unfair electoral advantage. In another development, the Prime Minister's team have confirmed that Mr. Johnson will not find time for an interview with ITV before the general election. He is the only leader of a major party to turn down the request from the channel's Tonight programme. A spokesman for ITV said the programme had bid for Mr. Johnson when the general election was called. They have contacted his press team on repeated occasions with times and dates offered to film an interview, the spokesman said. Boris Johnson's team have today confirmed he will not be taking part. The programme will instead feature a profile of the Prime Minister using fresh interviews with other contributors and archive footage. ITV Tonight presenter Julie Etchingham has recorded an interview with Jeremy Corbyn to be broadcast at 19:30 GMT. Labour Party chairman Ian Lavery said Boris Johnson thinks he's born to rule and doesn't have to face scrutiny. He's running scared because every time he is confronted with the impact of 9 years of austerity, the cost of living crisis and his plans to sell out our NHS, the more he is exposed. Liberal Democrat leader Joe Swinson said Boris Johnson must stop ducking scrutiny. His cowardly behaviour shows why he simply isn't fit to be Prime Minister. She said it was bad enough that her party had been excluded from the BBC's head-to-head debate between Mr. Johnson and Mr. Corbyn, and even worse that right now Boris Johnson won't be held properly to account for his lies and extreme Brexit plans. The BBC's Andrew Neil has issued a challenge to Boris Johnson to take part in a sit-down interview with him before next week's general election. Mr. Johnson is the only leader of a main party not to have faced a half-hour, primetime BBC One grilling by Mr. Neil. The Conservative leader has denied claims he is avoiding scrutiny. But Mr. Neil addressed the PM directly at the end of his fourth leader interview at this election, with Brexit Party leader Nigel Farage. It is not too late. We have an interview prepared. Oven ready, as Mr. Johnson likes to say, he said, in a monologue. The theme running through our questions is trust, and why it's so many times in his career, in politics and journalism, critics and sometimes even those close to him have deemed him to be untrustworthy. It is, of course, relevant to what he is promising us all now.